My name is Kira Loughran, and I'm the Creative Associate for the Forum at the Stratford Festival. And welcome to For the Love of Godot, our conversation today with Brian Dennehy and Jennifer Tarver, who are working on this year's production at Stratford of Waiting for Godot, which opens on July 27th. June 27th. It's the other J month. If you don't know, which I'm sure you do, but a little bit about Brian and Jennifer. This is Brian's third season at Stratford, and he's playing the Earl of Shrewsbury and Mary Stuart and Pozzo in Waiting for Godot. He's also been seen here in Krapp's Last Tape, Huey, All's Well That Ends Well, Twelfth Night, and The Homecoming. But you may also know his work from Broadway, where he's appeared in such shows as Death of a Salesman and Long Day's Journey into Night, where he won the Tony for Best Actor, Inherit the Wind with Christopher Plummer and Peter Brook's The Cherry Orchard. He also works regularly in Chicago, particularly with the Goodman Theater, doing such shows as Galileo, The Iceman Cometh, which he's done twice, Desire Under the Elms. In London, he won an Olivier Award for his performance in Death of a Salesman, and he's also done extensive film and television work, too much to mention, which has garnered him 6 Emmy nominations. Jennifer Tarver is the new artistic director of Necessary Angel Theatre in Toronto. She is in her 5th season here at Stratford, directing Waiting for Godot, but she's also directed The Homecoming, King of Thieves, Zastrozzi, and Krapp's Last Tape for us. Elsewhere and recently, she recently did Hedda Gabler at the Hartford Stage in Connecticut, Beckett with Queen of Puddings in Canadian Stage in Toronto, Krapp's Last Tape at the Goodman, Crave with Nightwood Theatre, and That Time, which was 5 Beckett shorts at the Theatre Centre in Toronto. She's also worked as a writer and director on her own creations, Not Faust, History Play, and she's gone away with her company Theatre Ecstasis and Hum. She also directs opera, such operas as The Rape of Lucrece, The Magic Flute, Midsummer Night's Dream, and Cosi fan tutte. In awards, she's won, I think, almost every Canadian theatre directing award, including the 2010 Seminovich Prize Shortlist, the 2002 John Hirsch Directing Award, and the 2006 Pauline McGibbon Award in Directing, and has multiple Dora Awards for Outstanding Direction and for Writing. So thank you so much for being here today. So I will start out by saying I am not a Samuel Beckett expert by any stretch.
Neither are we.
But one of the things that I think is really interesting and that I'm really pleased that Stratford is including Waiting for Godot in our season this year is looking at Beckett's role as one of the last modernists and one of the first postmodernists, and such a great work as Waiting for Godot being presented at this classical theater. I was wondering, for me, Beckett was one of the first dramatists that I felt a real personal connection to in accessibility as a theater artist, and I was wondering if you could touch a bit on what your personal connection or interest in Beckett is. Brian?
Well, I remember I was being a school kid in Brooklyn, New York, back in the 50s when there was this burble of excitement about this production that was being done in, of all places, the Coconut Grove Theater in, what the hell's the name of that suburb of Miami? Anyway, Coconut Grove, I guess it was, huh? And Burt Lahr was in it, and E.G. Marshall, and Jose Ferrer was directing, and it was a play by this Irishman who, very wisely, was living in Paris. And so I immediately said, that's a very interesting combination of events going on down there at the age of 16. Eventually, I got to see it in New York. Maybe 2 or 3 years later. I think Lahr wasn't in it at that point, I don't believe. It was obviously a new voice, a new vision, something really interesting going on at a period in America where the changes weren't exactly manifest. I mean, Eisenhower was president. Movies were king. Milton Berle was on television. And Sam Beckett was exploding in the theater world. And I've been interested in him ever since then. I've had a chance to play him a couple of times, mostly with my friend here, and we've done some interesting stuff with it. This is going to be an interesting production. I'm bumming along behind trying to catch up with it, but I think I will. But he was a student of Joyce, lived with Joyce for a long time, or lived close to him and worked with him, was very much involved with Joyce's daughter, who broke away and went to the opposite end of the writing scale, a minimalist, absurdist writing. Joyce was pretty freeform himself, but it was always based on a model. In the case of Ulysses, it was Greek classics. So two fascinating men, and Beckett is still a powerful and huge talent that we're periodically wrestling with. So I'm glad to be here doing it.
Jen?
My first introduction to Beckett was actually a production in Edmonton, Alberta, done by a modern dance company there. And they did Act Without Words 2, which is a mime, has no words. And Beckett said at one point that Waiting for Godot had been a sketch for this piece. And this piece, Act Without Words 2, is 10 to 12 minutes long without one spoken word of text. And it's just two men who appear in sacks. And alternately, they come out of their sacks and get dressed in completely different rhythms. One is very fastidious and brisk and fast and precise, and the other is slow and lugubrious and drags his feet. And they get out of their sacks, get dressed, do their exercises, brush their teeth, go through their daily routines, get back in their sacks, roll over each other, so the sacks switch places. And that happens 3.5 times during the course of the play, and it's 12 minutes long. And it absolutely blew my mind. And I was about 17 or 18 at the time, and I had no idea who Beckett was. And it was the most arresting piece of theater I'd seen up until that point. And I just thought, wow, this is this is some writer. And I didn't even know at that point I wanted to be a director, but my impulses as a director come from space. And so I always come back to Beckett because he writes first and foremost with space, not with the spoken word. And obviously with many of his plays, those two mesh, and they mesh brilliantly. But I think some of his strongest work is silent, or at least without word. And for me as a director, space is my pull into everything I do. So for me, there's a very strong attraction.
Well, that sort of brings me to another question in terms of Beckett. It's been said that he discovered at a certain point that his art was very subjective and wholly from his own inner world in terms of as a response to, but in terms of creating a world that just was drawn from himself. And we've talked a bit about the world of Beckett and the universe of Beckett in that light.
Yeah. You mean in terms of him being an outsider? Or is that a different?
Sure.
I know you've got your topics there. I don't want to blend your topics. Well, I'll speak to that. I mean, in terms of Beckett as an outsider. I mean, in rehearsal, Brian, you're constantly talking about the political context of the era in which he wrote Waiting for Godot, and I think it's tremendously significant in terms of the turmoil that was going on in the world at that time. And I think no writer or person of intelligence could have been immune from that. But I think regardless of where Beckett lived, whether it was Ireland or Paris, and what era he was writing in, and whatever was going on in the world, my sense of him is that he frequently felt outside the society and saw things from someone who steps outside and looks back in. And one of my favorite Beckett quotes, sort of related to this idea, is that the opposite of an artistic life is good housekeeping. and I think for that, and I actually have experienced that to an acute degree especially since I have a 3-year-old. But that Beckett and daily life, housekeeping, do not go hand in hand. And I think my sense of who he is through his writing is that he struggled with that daily. And that he was at odds with daily life, housekeeping, relationships, society, politics, morality. I mean, you name it. I think he was, his plays speak a kind of discomfort with where he lived. And Godot in particular, the way I've structured this production is very much in line with that idea of him being an outsider. Because I think when, as a director, one of the first things I ask myself is, where is it, when is it, what's the context, what's the era? And with Godot, the answers were not forthcoming in terms of any kind of specific time or place. And that in the end, my sense is that it's a play that only exists within itself. It's its own self-contained universe. And that Beckett put in the form of the split personality of Vladimir and Estragon, or his own duo version of himself, these two characters, he sort of plopped them into this little self-enclosed universe and wanted to watch how he would respond to various extreme situations from the outside. So my sense of Godot is that it's Beckett's experiment with himself, and he created little puppets in the form of Vladimir and Estragon, and then brought in bigger, more extreme puppets to essentially freak the crap out of these characters. I mean, Pozzo and Lucky come along, and they are all of humanity in the most extreme versions, you know, a dictator and a slave, and then two severely handicapped people who can't get up, one of whom is blind, one of whom is dumb. I mean, it's just, the representation of humanity couldn't get more extreme. And there's Beckett in both Vladimir and Estragon trying to figure out what the hell is going on. So anyway, it's a long-winded answer of how the idea of Beckett as an outsider certainly spoke to me for this production, but does in pretty much all his work that I'm familiar with.
And so, Brian, how does it fit for you in terms of, as an actor, going into that universe and having to reconcile some of Beckett's very long and specific stage directions in the creation of that world with getting inside it internally as an actor?
Beats the hell out of me. I got a quote, though, from, always use a quote if you don't know what the hell I'm saying. But this is from Harold Pinter, who was, of course, very close to Beckett. And it's a great quote, so it's worth hearing anyway. The farther it goes, the more good it does me. I don't want philosophies, tracts, dogmas, creeds, ways out, truths. I don't want answers. I want nothing from the bargain basement. He is the most courageous, remorseless writer going, and the more he grinds my nose in the shit, the more grateful I am. He's not fucking me about. He's not leading me up any garden path. He's not slipping me the wink. He's not flogging me a remedy or a path or a revelation or a basin full of breadcrumbs. He's not selling me anything I don't want to buy. He doesn't give a bollock whether I buy it or not. He hasn't got his hand over his heart. Well, I'll buy his goods, hook, line, and sinker, because he leaves no stone unturned and no maggot lonely. Now that's a great line. No stone unturned and no maggot lonely. And that's a Beckett line. He brings forth a body of beauty. His work is beautiful. That's Pinter, pretty smart guy about the theater. That's good enough for me. I mean, the thing about Beckett is you have to figure out how to play naturalistic, a very supernatural, unnatural, surreal world. It ain't easy. We have two of the most extraordinary actors I've ever worked with in this play, Stephen Ouimet and Tom Rooney, who glide through this material with as little, what seemingly as little effort as can imagine. And it's beautiful, a beautiful thing to watch. I'm more like a rhinoceros trying to find his way out of a bunch of cardboard boxes right now.
But that is Pozzo.
There you go. Speaking of sock puppets, one of the first conversations I had with herself next door was that she was going on in an early rehearsal, first time we'd ever worked together. And I said, excuse me, do I look like I have a big hole in my ass where you're going to stick your hand up inside and go like this? Because if you'd like to try, good luck. I have an Irish asshole, very tight. But we have since learned to work together, and
Surgical
and
gloves
so far
notwithstanding.
I'm a virgin anally.
Is there something in Jen's work or perspective of Beckett that you think helps you in your work?
Well, the thing about Jen is, first of all, she's a genuine intellectual, which is a good thing when you're around me, because I need one. And she has tremendous insights. She sees something and she'll immediately see a possible direction, a possible current that perhaps you hadn't thought about. And she'll say it to you, and then you say to yourself, I don't think I can do that. But eventually, you do. More than any director I've ever worked with, she is right. She's right. She hardly ever says something. Sometimes she does say something a little weird, which you immediately ignore. But 95%, which is a pretty good grade, she's right on the money, and it makes your performance deeper and funnier, and more savage, which is a good thing, depending upon the part. So we're linked, whether you like it or not.
Jen, can you talk a bit in terms of when you're preparing for the show, what Brian's talking about in terms of how you get into it, specifically at Stratford, where you're staging Beckett not in a proscenium, as is often delineated through his stage directions, but in our wonderful thrust theaters?
Sure. Well, Brian and I had that experience both with Krapp's Last Tape and now with Godot. Krapp's Last Tape was right here. And Beckett writes pretty much solely for proscenium. And many of the indications, the stage directions, the physical indications are in relation to a proscenium stage. He speaks of, just simply the left and right wings, orchestra pits, curtains, that sort of thing. And
Downstage, upstage.
Downstage, upstage. One of the first stage directions in Krapp's Last Tape is that Krapp was to push the banana peel into the pit, into the orchestra pit. Well, it would have been right there. So everybody would have been staring at it for the whole show, slipped on it during intermission. I mean, there's no way it could stay there in the aisle. Furthermore, it's not a pit. When you push something into a pit, it disappears. So it's a nice exit. So Brian and I spent weeks trying to reconfigure what the hell happened to the banana peel, and it ended up going back into the desk drawer, which I hope the Beckett estate is not in attendance. Because we'll both be arrested and taken away. But the banana peel went back into the drawer, and what ensued was this kind of shell game with banana peels, and it changed the meaning for both of us.
We came up with a great solution.
Of the whole first sequence of that play, and the first third of it is a mime. It's without words, and it's pretty much Krapp's interaction with several objects, most notably the banana, and it was all inspired by the fact that we were in a thrust. We didn't have a pit. We didn't have the front edge of the stage that could isolate an object like that. To me, it's a blast because it's about finding equivalents that help to blow the dust off of what could risk being a museum piece. I mean, I never see Beckett's work as a museum piece, but it certainly helps to stir up any historical context of previous productions, and it forces you. I think the great thing about working with Brian on it is that we were both in agreement that we had to find an equivalent. We couldn't just change it. It had to have the same, what we were interpreting, meaning and interpretation to that moment and to that action. And in doing that, it found something of the moment and of our production that was new. I mean, I wouldn't say it was. We tried not to make it different. It was inevitable that it was different. We were forced into making it different.
The whole point about Beckett, that play, and almost every play, it's also true of this play. Beckett loves slapstick humor. It's slapstick. That's why he loved Buster Keaton, who did not love him back. They made a movie together, which was a spectacular disaster. But that's where Bert Lahr came in. And Bert Lahr would every night say, I have no idea what the hell we're doing out here. But it was funny, which is what he counted. But the whole bit with the banana, the whole thing with Kraft's Last Tape is a man communicating with himself 35 years younger. An interesting sidelight of that is when they got ready in 1962, I guess it was, 60, to publish Kraft's Last Tape for the first time. It said, a man in present time in a bed sit in Dublin with his tape recorder. And many productions had been done, and some assistant editor said, excuse me, but these tape recordings were made 30, 35 years ago. There wasn't any tape recorders 30, 35 years ago. And all of a sudden there was this consternation, and said, everybody saying, well, my God, what do we do? How do we solve this problem? And Sam takes an envelope and he writes on it, there, put that in the front page, and it says, sometime in the future. Problem solved. But the point is, the slapstick is the banana. He takes out a banana. When you take out a banana in front of an audience, the audience starts to laugh. Now, why do they start to laugh? Because, first of all, banana's funny. Second of all, something's going to happen with the banana peel, and somebody's going to get hurt. So they're laughing in anticipation of somebody getting hurt. That's what audiences are. Bloodthirsty. And Beckett, in his wiseness, says, drops the banana peel, walks a little further, comes around, looks at the banana peel, crosses it again, then slips on it and falls. Really, Sam? 8 times a week? Falls? Actor 60, 70 years old? I don't think so. So we had to come up with a fix, and we came up with an ingenious one, actually, which extends the analogy a little further, which is he looks at the banana peel, he decides, through the magic of acting, that he's going to test the old shibboleth. Slip on a banana peel, break your arm. He starts playing with it with his foot. And he gets away with it. He's got the desk behind him, he's holding the desk, and he's moving the thing, and finally starts to dance on it, and he hasn't slipped. It's been great. He's beaten the absolute heaven. He's beaten fate. He's defeated fate, human being. Picks up the banana peel, throws it away, puts that foot on the floor, and slips. Because he's got all that stuff on the bottom of the feet. Huge laugh when it worked. And it was only somewhat painful. But that's Beckett. Life is a joke, and it hurts, and it's too short. Life is painful, and it's too short. So.
Brian, would you talk a little bit about your work at the festival and the differences, sort of expanding a bit more, between playing Beckett and playing in some of the in the Shakespeares that you've done, and then also contrasting that with working in naturalism, like with O'Neill or Miller, of the demands on you, or is there a different way that you approach the work?
Well, the great thing about coming up here is you are working with a bunch of people, first of all, who have worked here for a long time and are way more experienced at Shakespeare than I am, which is almost not any. And so I was way out of my depth the first couple of times I worked at it, and Des McAnuff kept poking me with the oar to make sure my head was underwater as often as it could be. He would write notes, and everybody had little slips of paper. And you could paper a good-sized room wall with my notes, believe me. But anyway, the point is, but I learned, and I'm adequate now as a Shakespearean actor. No better than that. But the point is the atmosphere, the place, the people. I mean, there are more people devoted here to this art form than I've ever run into in my whole life. And they're all here. And wonderful actors, extraordinary actors. Wimet and Rooney and McCamus and Shauna and Lucy. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And great directors. And it was a great place to meet her and the stuff that we've done. And hopefully we'll do some in the future, depending upon how much more tread I got on the tires. And they're running bald right now, believe me. I'm running out of road, but we'll see. But it's a great place to work, and I'm happy to be here.
Jen, is there, in terms of your working here alongside those plays, do you see a mission within presenting this kind of work within, alongside the classics and contemporary work, or the difference when you've directed contemporary work here versus working with Beckett or Pinter?
Well, I mean, we were just talking earlier about this idea of Beckett, and I guess Pinter fits this category as well as being kind of vintage avant-garde, or classic avant-garde. That it still has the sensation of being avant-garde. I mean, particularly Pinter, when we did the Homecoming, certain scenes in the Homecoming are still hugely shocking, which surprised me. I mean, just to figure out how those scenes would be responded to by an audience, and Beckett too. I think the simultaneously abstract and absurd quality in his writing, it still packs a punch. It still twists our head around in the way that contemporary avant-garde work does today. And I think it's a great juxtaposition with everything else that goes on here. So, yeah, to me it just adds to the vibrancy of a season here. To be.
Can you talk a bit more about the work that Beckett does in isolating things and in that stripping down of how you think that works theatrically?
Well, yeah, just a little bit. And I was really immersed in this philosophy with Krapp's last tape, so it's a little bit foggy, since then. But not only is Beckett a minimalist, and I'm not sure. I can't remember what term he used, that it's something along the lines of an isolationist, that he was very interested in isolating media, I guess. Like if you look at he does this a lot in his shorter plays. I mean, a few of them I've already mentioned, the acts without words. There's an act without words 1 and an act without words 2, which is not about text. So he puts text over there and focuses on movement and image. Then with a play like, for example, Not I, all you get is a mouth. You don't get anything else but a speaking mouth. There's no movement except the movement of the lips. There's no stage image except just the pinhole of light that shines on the lips. So everything else disappears except the mouth. It's all about internal language. There is no movement beyond that. So I don't know. It's just it's one of his techniques, and I think it's something that he strove towards progressively, both a kind of minimalism in his writing and isolating various components. It's like Beckett seems to be interested in dealing with one thing at a time, which is very appealing to me because I'm not a multitasker. But yeah, I mean, it was a whole philosophy of his, and something that got progressively more and more prevalent in his plays as he wrote them.
Any jazz freaks here? You? Yeah. Well, I'll tell you why I mention it, because Beckett actually at one point refers to music. in this analogy. There were two great modern individuals of Black American, Afro-American jazz, Charlie Parker and Miles Davis. And if you think of the printed word in English, there are two great forces. One is James Joyce and the other is Beckett, from whom all other rivers flowed in both cases of modern work. Well, there's the analogy. Charlie Parker played cascades of notes, hundreds of notes in one frame, blah, 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 with the saxophone. It was unbelievable, the sound that he created. His recordings today are still, listened to by musicians who could not understand how he could play as richly and as powerfully with as much sound, different sound. It was just ripping tides of notes, which is what James Joyce did. Ulysses, Finnegan's Rainbow, which is even, Finnegan's Rainbow, Finnegan's Wake, which is even more powerful in its tidal wave of words. Beckett, who was a student of Joyce and spent a lot of time with him, became a minimalist, like Miles Davis. Miles Davis has these little thin, clear lines. He plays, every single note is carefully chosen and is carefully selected and placed in certain places. And they worked together, Parker and Davis, as Joyce and Beckett did. And one was the father of the other. And it's hard to imagine modern art today without James Joyce and Sam Beckett and Charlie Parker and Miles Davis. So that's kind of the analogy that I see for myself. It helps explain who they are and what they were trying to do.
Is there something when in working with Beckett, and you've got that is as didactic as he is within stage directions of buttoning his fly, or pauses versus silences, or speeches where half of the speech at least is stage direction, that becomes like playing jazz or like playing music rhythmically, that you find? Or
The funny thing is, he wasn't like that himself. One of the problems of doing Godot and Krapp's Last Tape is he directed 10 or 12 versions himself, and he changed every one of them. And when he was alive, famously in the New York production years ago, terrible production with Steve Martin and Robin Williams, they would call Sam all the time in Paris and say, is it okay if we say this? And they'd have some completely wrong modern New York reference about cab drivers or something. And Sam would say, sure, I don't care, do what you want. He was getting his check for 60 grand a week, which was, he wasn't going to come see it, that's for sure. But then when he dies, the estate becomes absolutely rigid, which is always the way. And no change, nothing can be done. So the funny thing is, Beckett was far less religious about his work than the people who came after.
But having said that, I think Beckett was precise in his own moment.
Yeah.
And I think that he would appreciate people to be precise with him and with themselves. That it's not the
But he
text
wasn't precise himself, was my point.
No, but I'm saying I think he was in his own moment. Because when you look at, like, for example, each version of Krapp's gets actually more and more and more and more precise. Same with each version of Godot. Yes, they're different, but as they evolve, they reduce, like a good stock. And his indications become more and more precise. And I like to think that if Beckett was alive, he would appreciate artists engaging with integrity with his work, as opposed to blindly following something or recreating a museum piece. I mean,
we're talking about Robin Williams now.
I don't know if he can actually recreate anything twice.
So I think if you come at it with the intention of precision, I mean, obviously that whole thing about the banana peel, it was so exhilarating because it was like we were let out of school with it, right?
But also, that was very much in keeping with his point.
But and that's my point.
Yeah.
I think we were precise with ourselves.
Right.
We weren't just screwing around. We were trying to find a solution that was equivalent.
That would have made him happy.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was in line with the philosophies and the meaning of the play and the aesthetic of the silence and, you know, all sorts of things. So, yeah, in fact, I remember, I think it was Jason Miller called me about halfway through our rehearsal process and said, oh, I'm just going to have a discussion with the Beckett estate. They want to know what, if any, changes you're making. And I just said, you're the one who put it in a proscenium.
Or in a
go,
thrust.
like I was just like, there's pages. I couldn't even, where would I begin? Come and see it with the text in your lap and have a good conversation with them. Because
For example, I had the idea of, I don't know how many people here are familiar with the play. I had the idea years ago, fooling around with thinking about directing it, of making Lucky a woman. Like a battered kind of Corinne with net stockings and one broken heel and her makeup coming down her face and an old wig that kind of sits on her head. She's representing, of course, womanhood, the battered, exploited character that exists in the play, making an additional point. Well, of course, the estate went crazy, said absolutely not. But I bet you Beckett would have liked the idea.
Why don't we open it up for some questions? Yep.
You said that Vladimir and Estragon to you sort of represented Beckett and Lucky and Pozzo, the outside world. I know in a later play, Endgame, the tramps are gone. It's just the master and the slave.
Well, there's two people in jars, don't forget.
That's right, the hammer and nail. So to me, I always thought that Pozzo and Lucky were also representations of Beckett, the way those two characters are in Endgame, sort of maybe something he struggled with.
So maybe Brian, you can take this. If your thoughts on Pozzo and Lucky being aspects of Beckett as well, and not just as Jen was talking about earlier, that Vladimir and Estragon are aspects of Beckett and Pozzo and Lucky are the outside world. How do you feel in the role?
Well, the funny thing about Pozzo is that he, it seems to me, he is the most human of the characters. He's ferocious, he's greedy, he's mean, he cries when he's hurt, he only sees when he's blind, and he is subject to all of those weaknesses of humanity. The other characters seem to be, I mean, certainly Estragon is also, but Estragon, for example, remembers absolutely nothing, which is probably a good way to live. But, I mean, it just seems to me that yeah, with Endgame, you have the same thing. He's blind, and he can't move. He's in a wheelchair. So they're very strong similarities. He's also very strong, and he's also he's imperious. There's no question that Beckett was politically motivated to a certain extent. There were the exploiters in the world and the people who were exploited. It's a complicated political argument, but it's certainly political. But it's also based on all of human folly, human fallacy, human weakness. Again, he's writing in Paris, right after the atomic bombs were dropped, right after the devastation of Dresden and Coventry and the discoveries of the camps. And some of this stuff, you know, sure, he lived long enough to recover from it, but to be in the middle of it, he and his wife lived rough on the streets, the roads outside of Lyon, I think, because they were being pursued by the Gestapo, and had they been caught, they would have probably been executed. Those experiences can't be separated from any of his writing, it seems to me.
Another question? Yes.
You talked about how the slapstick humor is very important to Beckett. I just finished a biography on Laurel and Hardy, and the author tramps in Godot to Laurel and Hardy. What do you think of that parallel?
So the question was, maybe Jen, you can take it, comparing Laurel and Hardy to the two tramps in Godot.
Well, to me, and I'm not hugely familiar with Laurel and Hardy, but I did in preparation for this. Okay, let me go first, then you can talk.
I am, you fucking snob. I'm a Canadian from Toronto. We don't know much about Laurel and Hardy.
So I was trying to catch up with Brian in my research, and looking into Laurel and Hardy YouTube videos, and I came across one where the skinny guy. See, I don't even know which is which. Yeah, Laurel.
You don't know who Stan Laurel is? And you're in the theater.
She's an intellectual.
Okay. So Laurel is in a little, like a little Mini Cooper, and parks behind a dump truck full of sand, full of dirt. You probably know the sketch I'm talking about. And Hardy gets out, and because he can't move it out of the parking lot, he wants Hardy to go and move the truck an inch so he can pull out. Instead of it, of course, he lifts the dump on the truck, and it pours a pile of dirt, leaving Laurel's head neck up in a massive pile of sand. And I just looked at that and went, oh my God, that's Happy Days. That's it.
He
That's
probably
the
got
image.
it from Laurel.
Probably got it from Laurel and Hardy, yeah. Now, Brian, please, expert on Laurel and Hardy, expound.
Yeah, but he loves slapstick. I mean, there's a great story about him and Buster Keaton. He loved Buster Keaton. And when he became really successful, he actually was in a position to write and direct a movie, which is still available. I think it only runs about 3 minutes or 4 minutes, and got Buster Keaton, who was by then a grouchy old has-been drunk from Hollywood, who didn't have any money, had no idea who Beckett was or what he was doing, and acted terribly on the set, to Beckett's great disappointment. The picture is worth seeing only to see Keaton trying to deal with this material that he had no idea what it was about. Keaton's objective, as was Laurel and Hardy's and most slapstick comedians, was to make money. It was funny. It was interesting. If it's funny, if people buy it, if we can make another movie, let's do it. Whereas Beckett's interest in slapstick was from the standpoint of what it means about human life. Life as pain. Pain is funny to watch. And it was definitely a philosophical interest. And it is funny. It can be funny. It can be funny in Kraft's Last Tape when we pulled off this banana skit because the audience laughed like hell. And they wanted you to laugh. I mean, that's the funny thing. We had a pretty intellectual audience, I would say, seeing that play. And they knew the banana peel meant that somebody was going to get hurt. And they wanted somebody to get hurt. They would not be satisfied until we came up with something, and we did, where I got hurt. And they laughed like hell. You do the math.
Someone else? Yes.
I saw the production of Kraft's Last Tape, and I often talk about how for the first 5 or 10 minutes, whatever it was, that Brian didn't talk at all. And just his actions brought out the emotion of humor in you. I just wondered, how do you direct that, or is it left up to the talent of the actor? I mean, that in itself.
Well, you want to see a real fight right here, right now, don't you? You're looking for blood, right? Blood on the floor. That's what you want.
The very contentious question was, how do you achieve the humor in those silent scenes between the director or the actor? I'll let you fight it out.
Yes.
Well,
how do you?
listen, just to back up, I mean, Kira, you never asked me about Brian earlier on in this
I cut you
conversation.
off, actually.
But I would say one of my greatest pleasures working with any actor has been working with this man who leaves no stone unturned. I can't speak of his relationship to the maggots, but he absolutely leaves no stone unturned. And for me, text is everything that occurs in the space of a live performance. And so approaching text that is not spoken word, for me, isn't really any different. It's story, and it's action, and it's beats. And, I watched Brian turn over every single stone of every moment over and over and over and over again. And part of the pleasure was for me to just sit back and watch that. Obviously we sculpted it together, but he's relentless and more demanding of himself than of anybody else. And so that's how we went at it. You look at text as text. It's every physical indication is a phrase or a word or a piece of punctuation, and it's the same. To me, it's the same process, just in terms of process. And this man he doesn't let himself off the hook, and he doesn't let me off the hook, and
well, vice versa.
That's
One of the interesting things about this relationship, which is a complicated one, is that we do both have this enormous appetite for seriously working the material. It doesn't ever get to a place where, okay, that's good enough. Let's recreate that. It may never happen that way again. And both of us are the same way. And we fight and we argue. And sometimes I'm abrupt. But she's very tolerant. She gets me back. She gets with those sulks, No, I'm fine. I'm not upset about anything. I am Irish, when I have the fight, and let's get it over with and get a drink. But anyway, I've never worked with anybody like her. I don't know how much more work is left in me, probably not a hell of a lot, but I'd like to do it with her all the time if I can, because she's the same as I am.
We do have time for a few more questions. Yep.
You've spoken so much about the banana peel in the Crafts Last Tape, and it was a production I saw, and remember now that's hydrogen forming. Is there anything that we should look for in Godot that has that same nuance that you had to solve a problem because of the thrust stage that you can let us in on that we can sort of
So the question is for a sneak peek of Godot.
I'll let Brian, answer probably more extensively, but
it's not anything, first of all, it's the play. And second of all, it's Rooney and Wimette, who are magic. Magic. But there is something that's going to happen in this production that's going to really create a sensation, and that's Randy Hewson as Lucky. He's done stuff with this part. Now, that's a great part. And people have always figured out a way of making it work, because it's a curiosity. He wasn't satisfied with that. He's done enormous work on this, and the people, friends of mine who have come to see the various dresses that we've done, just come out astounded. So that's going to be, I think, the thing in this production which moves it in a direction which it hasn't been in before. Randy is Lucky.
But I would say there's nothing as specific as the banana peel in terms of that, but in terms of one thing I can think of in terms of the overall staging and the production approach is that, the Tom Patterson is also a very specific thrust. It's very, very different from this space, as I'm sure you know, and what we were able to create is almost sort of like a double proscenium. Because, I'm not going to give away why. It's because of the structure and the nature of the set, but it does create a kind of double proscenium, and the whole idea of the repetitions and the echoing and the mirroring, the forces of opposition that are at play, really played into that as a choreography in the space and the structure of the space. So I would say that would never happen in a proscenium. So that was a real pleasure to run with in this production.
For you.
For me. Only for me.
Yes.
that we've been working off is, it's referred to as a revised text, which, as opposed to the one that was originally published in 1958 or thereabouts, this revised text was based on a production at the Schiller Theater in Berlin that Beckett himself directed, in 75. And so he made a few significant changes to the text during that production as a result of the production. And this text is based on that, in combination with another production at a prison, actually, San Quentin. So it's an amalgamation of those. So this is the text that we've been using for this production.
Yes.
Ms. Tarver, what is it like for you to be part of the good old boys club of directing, since it seemed to be a largely male-dominated
What is it
questions for
like?
Jen.
It's just like saying, what's my life like? I don't know. There's this moment where, the hat switch with Vladimir and Estragon, they keep trying on each other's hats, and it goes through, Lucky's, Estragon's, Vladimir's, Lucky's, Estragon, Vladimir's, and Vladimir ends up with Lucky's hat, and he turns to Estragon, and he goes, how does it fit me? And Estragon says, how would I know? Like, it's my hat. That could be a pat answer, and I certainly don't mean to, belittle the notion of being a female director at Stratford, working with esteemed actors such as everybody in my cast. And I can't speak to how it's about or what it's like, because it's all I know. I can just say I know without a handful of very esteemed, particularly Canadian women, I wouldn't be here at all. So I'm pretty acutely aware of the steps I'm following.
It's not that.
I don't
It's not.
know.
It might have been. I'm trying to remember the beginning of my career, which is a long time ago, 30, 40 years ago, and I don't remember even then it being a problem. I knew Barbara Loden very well, who was a very highly celebrated director, or woman director, and of course she was married to Elia Kazan, which helped a little bit. But so in theater there were, and certainly now, musical directors. Rich musical directors like Susan Stroman and so forth. So it's the old story is, like Zero Mostel said. Somebody said, "Can we hire so and so as a director?" He says, "Can he give me a hit song? Hire him."
We also have actually 4 female directors in our playbill this year with Jennifer. We've got Martha Henry directing Measure for Measure, and Diana LeBlanc directing The Thrill, that's directing Taking Shakespeare, which is in rehearsals right now, and Donna Fiore, of course, headed up Fiddler on the Roof, and which are actually some of our most popular shows this season, which we're excited about, but it is a bit of a challenge always.
It's the old story. There's good directors and bad directors.
Yeah.
And the ratio seems to be the same.
I think
About
we've
75%.
got time for one.
Bad. 25% good.
One more question? Yes.
Mr. Dennehy, we've talked a lot about that opening scene in Crap's Last Tape, and I was extremely impressed with the collective energy in this space while you were performing it. And I'm wondering what that's like from your point of view, to be out there without any words to say, all of us waiting for you to entertain us, and how do you feel about that? Are you comfortable with that? Was that hard for you to do in any way? Or?
Well, I think that one of the things an actor has to do, whether it's Crap's Last Tape or whether it's Neil Simon, when you're on stage, your focus has to be your concentration has to be so intense that the audience, whether you have anything to say or not, or whether you're doing something, and there's all kinds of gags in Neil Simon, that you have to focus the audience's attention down to what you're looking at, what you're doing, how you're doing it, and so forth, because you want to get the gag. It's a mechanical thing, but if you know how to concentrate as an actor, you can make the audience concentrate on the same things that you are pretending to concentrate on. Acting is pretending. It's like being 12 years old. Some people are really, really good at it, and some people are not. But getting an audience to do what you want them to do. Somebody said, what's the greatest thing about being an actor? I said, applause, the laughs, and blah, 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 blah. And I said, no. The greatest thing about acting is silence. When you have 800 people silent, not rustling the programs, not moving around, not whispering with each other, not getting ready to cough whether they need to or not. They're just completely absorbed in whatever you're doing. And maybe half the time you're not talking, more than half the time. Silence is what pays, and because that's what you want. You want them to listen, you want them to pay attention. So is it a talent to do that? Or is it, yeah, it's probably a trick more than anything else, but it's all tricks. You know, it's, I mean, the fascinating thing about art, and I'm certainly not the first person to say this, all art is fraud. If it's a painting, it's fraud. It's a piece of canvas with paint on it. And if you go to see sunflowers in Chicago, in a room all by itself, small painting, if you look at it right, and you can't hardly not, you know more about life and death and energy than you would if you sat in a field in southern France and looked at sunflowers, which is what art can do. Art can make you understand something about your life that you would not understand by just being in your life. That's the whole point. Writing, music, poetry, acting. You see something, you realize something, you feel something. That exactly the same situation in real life would not have that effect. So it's one of the interesting challenges of doing this. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't.
I'd like to thank Brian and Jennifer. That's all the time we have today. We're at the very beginning of our first forum foray, which is happening all through this week till Sunday. There's at least 2 or 3, up to 5 sometimes, forum events, which are in a range of structures. There's talks, there's performances, there's comedy nights, there's speeches, lectures, discussions. There are these folders in all of our theaters, and you might also be able to find them around town. There's a calendar on the back, and then details for all of the events happening this month, and we'll be printing one of these for every month this summer. It'll be available at the end of the month. If you had a good time, please spread the word, because it's the first year of the initiative, and it always takes a while to let people know what's going on. Tomorrow, there's some events at the University of Waterloo. Today's Youth Driving Social Change. We've got the Egyptian ambassador to Canada speaking about the role of youth at the Arab Spring. The leader of the Ontario, Ottawa, Gatineau, Idle No More movement, speaking about the youth involved in that movement, as well as some of artists. Mitchell Cushman, who's assistant directing Merchant of Venice, and his work in terms of looking at theater, finding a place for theater in changing society, in his work in Toronto. And Stephanie Perrin from the community group Manifesto has been using art to create, to empower youth that are traditionally marginalized in Canada and in Toronto. They're all speaking at a panel at 10:30. These are all in Stratford, the University of Waterloo Stratford campus. We are on the stage of Cynthia Dale's fantastic concert, Outside Looking In, which is just in its last 2 weeks, running till this week and next week, Tuesdays and Thursdays in the afternoon. Tomorrow evening, there's a late night comedy standoff, which is stand-up comics going head-to-head, 6 fantastic comics, including Elvira Kurt, CBC Radio's Sabrina Jalise, Matt Watts from CBC's Tuesdays and Thursdays. It's a fantastic lineup, late night at 11 p.m. And as well as The Ambassadors, which is a conversation again between the ambassador of Egypt to Canada and the ambassador from the United States to Canada, David Jacobson, speaking about their work in Canada as outsiders and posted in a foreign country. So please come on out and join us, and thanks again for your time. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Jennifer.
I gotta go over and show